Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Our featured speaker today is Marwa Fatafta, Director of the MENA region for Access Now. If you missed last week's session with Matt Mahmoudi, it's now online. You can view and share that. We will put that in the chat for you all. We'll remind you that, like last week, this session is also being recorded. We'll also remind you that this is week 2 of 4 in this series. And so for the next 2 Thursdays at this exact same time, we have speakers on similar topics. So Shir Haver will be speaking next week about Israel's shutdown startup economy. So definitely tune into that as well. Today, after just a brief introduction, I'll be handing the program over to Marwa for a talk, and then that will be followed by questions and answers. You can use the questions and answers feature of Zoom to put your questions in at any time. So, hi, my name is Mallory Nodal. I'm a longtime volunteer with Stop the Wall since about 2009. It's my pleasure to facilitate this for you today. However, we're 160 days into a genocide. There have been 31,000 people killed. Israel is continuing to bomb Gaza, attack aid. Just in the last 24 hours, an UNRWA truck and 1 warehouse, including lives lost, have been destroyed by the Israeli military, and 75 years of Israeli apartheid and colonialism. This is all happening because of continuing international complicity. And it's something that Stop the Wall has fought against since about 2012, after the construction of the wall in the occupied West Bank. Now, you can learn more about Stop the Wall online really easily. You can also, if you watch the original video from last week, we get a bit more of an overview for you. But just suffice to say that the digital is now part of the infrastructure of apartheid. It's part and parcel of how Israel is repressing Palestine, and it's why we want to bring these issues to you, to our audience today. So with that, I just want to swiftly hand it over to Marwa, who is an eminent expert on this topic, speaks with experience firsthand, and we're just so happy to have you, Marwa. So take it away, and just a reminder to the audience, you can put your questions in the chat anytime. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mallory, for the introduction, and thanks to Stop the Wall campaign for organizing this very important series of webinars on the role of tech in facilitating the oppression, subjugation of Palestinians in occupied Palestine. As Mallory said, I am Palestinian. I also happen to work on digital rights issues. I live currently in Germany since 2014. I left directly after the Gaza war back then. And it's atrocious that we are here today, yet witnessing genocide being live streamed on our screens and mobile phones with full complicity of governments and companies. And I'm happy to share today about the lived experience of Palestinians and how technology has become part and parcel of Israel's system of apartheid and oppression. I want to start by saying and emphasizing that at the very core of Israel's occupation and apartheid is population and land control. So in order to systemize land grab as a settler colonial entity and also maintain a domination and control over Palestinians, Israel has cantonized both Palestinian land and the people that inhabit it in order, again, and assigned both access, privilege, and rights or lack thereof based on where Palestinians exist. And surveillance in its broadest sense, as in the surveying of Palestinians, who they are, what their relationships are, who they're married to, who are their families, the economic status, health status, political beliefs and convictions and affiliations, that is all integral to Israel's mission and state policy, pretty much from its inception and actually before Israel was founded as a state. Zionist militias took on the task of collecting and accumulating that information in order to arrive at where we are today. that Palestinians live in Bantustans, though completely fragmented from each other, and have pretty much no access to civil, political, social, or economic rights, and that becomes extreme or less extreme depending on where you are and which ID category you have as a Palestinian. If you're a Palestinian in the West Bank, as opposed to a Palestinian living in Gaza, as opposed to a resident in Jerusalem, or as a citizen of Israel for Palestinians who remained on their land or in their cities and towns in 1948. So Israel, throughout the years and the decades, have created an image of a godlike, omnipresent power that is all-knowing, all-seeing, all-observing of Palestinians at all times. So if you ask any Palestinian whether an adult or a child, it has become part of our culture and DNA to expect that Israel is spying on us, expects that Israel knows what we're up to, knows where we're working, our names of our siblings, our location, etc. And with new technologies, whether it be spyware or digital communications tools or biometric surveillance, those technologies have supercharged and accelerated further this mission and made Israel's occupation and its violence and oppression of Palestinians automated, more efficient, and industrial at scale. And I'll give you some examples of how that plays out in the day-to-day lives of Palestinians. So if you're crossing a checkpoint, a military checkpoint, which sadly remains a reality for us, if you want to move between one village to the other or one city to the other, you often have to go through a military checkpoint, which is manned by Israeli soldiers, also manned by private security, and often is a very dehumanizing and humiliating experience, waiting for hours to wait for your turn and have your ID checked. Now, for the past couple of years, Israel has upgraded that to, at least some checkpoints have been upgraded to become biometric checkpoints. So you have your biometrics taken, and you all need to show is a look at a certain camera at the infrastructure to determine whether you are eligible to access that checkpoint based on your ID or permissions you may have obtained from the Israeli military administration. The same can be said around facial recognition cameras planted in multiple places across the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, which makes public spaces for Palestinians heavily policed and monitored. If you look now, since the Gaza Strip is the main focus of our conversation, or the reason why we're having this conversation today, Israel has created out of the Gaza Strip really a testing lab for these types of technologies in every sense of the word. For one, Israel has managed to maintain its blockade of the Gaza Strip through manpower, but also through new technologies. And it's really dystopian to look at how Israel has created automated kill zones around the Gaza Strip using unmanned aerial vehicles, AI-powered drones that can look at both static and moving targets and track them in real time, or target them if needed. We're talking also about the use of remote quadcopters, also equipped with rifles. And we've seen during the past few months how these quadcopters have been hovering and chasing after journalists, even sniping and gunning down doctors and nurses inside of hospitals in the Gaza Strip. Also, Israel has used robo-snipers and AI-powered turrets set up along the Gaza border, as I said, designed to create automated kill zones in the span of 1.5 kilometers deep. They've also used a semi-autonomous military robots, which Israel has prided itself in saying that one of those tools, which is called Jaguar UGV, unmanned ground vehicle, as one of the first military robots in the world that can substitute soldiers on borders. And that vehicle, or that Jaguar, is used to surveil and patrol the Gaza border and is equipped with a machine gun, dozens of sensors, an automated driving system that would, again, target, monitor and target attacks if necessary. And you know, for the Israeli military, as I said, and for Palestinians that do live in a system of apartheid that have where they have no protection or no civil or political rights, Israel is at free will to deploy, test, and use these types of technologies without any ramifications, let alone any regulation or ethical standards. Pretty much, they have a free rein to do whatever the hell they want. And we saw how that now is playing out in the current genocide. We saw, for instance, how Israel has pretty much gamified the very lives of Palestinians who are fleeing constant and heavy bombardments across the Gaza Strip by creating this grid system with evacuation warnings that broke down the Gaza Strip into more than 600 blocks, and that Palestinians should access it with a QR code. That the Israeli military disseminated on social media and on leaflets in order to know whether they should leave their block to a safer one, noting that there is no safe place in Gaza. And the fact that Palestinians in the Gaza Strip had been denied access to the internet pretty much since October 7th due to Israel heavy bombardment and the destruction of internet and telecommunications infrastructure, and also killing the switch from their end whenever they deem it necessary. And so asking or expecting that Palestinians should use QR codes in order to seek safety and run for their lives is a pretty dystopian interpretation, a pretty much evil use of technology, or how far you can use technology in order to automate the forced displacement, suffering, and killing of Palestinians. I'm sure folks who are joined us and are interested in these issues have heard of the recent investigation done by an Israeli media outlet called 972 magazine, which revealed that the Israeli military are using a new AI tool called Hafsara, or the Gospel, which is built on our artificial intelligence and can generate hundreds of targets for the Israeli military that would take them probably hours upon hours and a lot of manpower to produce such targets. And those include Palestinian civilian homes and others, which according to the Israelis are legitimate targets, because with every bombing that we have seen, magically there is a Hamas tunnel, or there's a Hamas military command center, or there's a Hamas member. But the reality is that the Gaza Strip has been decimated, especially the north, to the point of no recognition. We're talking about a destruction that has been unparalleled in modern history. It exceeded the bombing of Syria's Aleppo between 2012-2016, the destruction of Ukraine's Mariupol in 2022, and some experts even say that the destruction of Gaza had exceeded the Allied bombing of Germany in World War II. So the facade of, or the use of AI in order to spit out military targets is also giving the Israeli authorities this image that they are pretty careful about calculating and deducting which civilian homes or infrastructure that should be bombed. Now, I want to also emphasize here that this is not just about some dystopian AI tech that Israel uses in order to control and subjugate and even kill Palestinians at an industrial scale, but it also creeps up in um, in the everyday digital platforms and services that we use around the world, that have become, a part and parcel of our experience using the internet. So, for example, or what I want to say here is that US tech companies have absolutely reproduced and amplified the system of apartheid and the power asymmetry dynamic that we see in occupied Palestine. And there are different manifestations of that. One, we see, for instance, how on social media platforms, Palestinian voices and Palestine content is systematically removed and censored, and Palestinian narratives are systematically suppressed. And it's pretty predictable every time violence escalates on the ground. Censorship online also skyrockets, and we've seen in this current genocidal war that Palestinian content, and especially content coming from the Gaza Strip, despite the shutdowns, despite the disinformation, we still see journalists risking their lives, risking being killed, risking starvation, in order to live stream and also portray and reflect and show the world what is actually happening in the Gaza Strip and the atrocities that people are enduring. And yet we see platforms like Meta, for instance, flagging that content as violating their terms of services. I've seen ridiculous examples of, for example, labeling dead bodies of Palestinians as violating of Instagram's policy on sexual activity and nudity. For instance, if you remember the very first bombing of Al Ahli Hospital, which was hair-raising and caused a massive scandal, given the atrocity of that crime. That content, some of that content showing the aftermath of the bombing, was immediately deleted under this policy, because of the algorithms didn't, I guess, differentiate between a person is killed in a conflict and a sexual activity or a nude body. Not to say that those are necessarily wrong and should be removed, but just pointing to the indignity of how these policies are applied. We also see how Palestinian content has been historically over-moderated and over-removed, and at the same time, the state-sponsored disinformation, the genocidal rhetoric, the incitement to violence, the hate speech, and particularly in Hebrew language and coming from Israeli officials, politicians, and the public profiles, have been pretty much left unmoderated. And that problem is not new. I want to emphasize that this has been an ongoing issue, and it's been pointed out to tech companies time and time and time again. And yet, even though the ICJ has ruled in January earlier this year that the risk of genocide is plausible, or let me rephrase it, that it's plausible that Israel is committing a genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza, which should be not a warning sign. It should flag all siren alarms at US-based tech companies and tech companies overall about their role, responsibilities, and even complicity in the current genocide. And yet we see the same status quo: over removal, over moderation of Palestinian content, and yet the protection or the laissez-faire approach to the genocidal rhetoric coming from Israeli pages and politicians. Other examples, we see how US-based tech companies are reproducing systems of apartheid. Google. And we can say a lot about Google and Project Nimbus and the direct investment and the provision of services to the Israeli authorities, whether it be by building their national cloud center, or through giving platform to the Israeli authorities to disseminate war propaganda in the midst of genocide. targeting primarily Western audiences in Europe and in the US to justify the war crimes and the crimes against humanity we see unfolding in the Gaza Strip. But before this war, we've repeatedly pointed to how, for example, Google Maps does not recognize many Palestinian villages and towns, does not recognize the military occupation in the West Bank, and pretends that everyone uses Google Maps in, let's say, the West Bank is an Israeli citizen or settler, meaning in a system of apartheid, you can have access to pretty much anywhere. And as a settler, there are roads built for you that connect the settlement to Israel proper. And those roads are not necessarily open to Palestinians. So if I, the Palestinian, want to use Google Maps to go, let's say, from my village to Hebron or from Hebron to Ramallah, I will be given a route shown, assuming that I am an Israeli settler or an Israeli citizen. So it means that I would have access, or I wouldn't necessarily have access, but I might be led to ways that could seriously risk my life, because the moment you end up in front of an Israeli settlement with a Palestinian car and a Palestinian number plate, and meet a happy trigger settler or a happy trigger soldier, that's it. That's it. There is, in the fact that Israel has been killing Palestinians with full impunity, and the fact that Palestinians in reality are walking targets that can be killed, maimed, injured at any time without repercussions for the settlers or Israeli soldiers, means that, that's it. It's game over. You can be killed, and that's it. And if your friends or family or the press wants to write about you and say that you have been martyred, it's a word that we, as Palestinians, use frequently to refer to everyone who has been killed by the Israeli occupation. You might also risk the chance of being censored on Meta's platforms, because, for instance, Meta considers the word shaheed to be a praise of terrorism, especially if it's used in conjunction with a designated group or an individual. And it's been revealed by Meta, no less, that this word shaheed, which means martyr, accounts for the most content takedowns under all of Meta's policies worldwide. I mean, just think about that. It's quite insane, and it really points to how these discriminatory policies and the stigmatization of Palestinians seen as terrorists, seen as a threat, disproportionately impacts them. Another example, and I will stop after that, is the denial of provision of services to Palestinians. We see that with PayPal and other financial services, financial companies in the US. We see that's, for example, now with GoFundMe, but PayPal in particular has been pretty open that they would not offer their services to Palestinians, but they do to Israelis, and they do to Israeli settlers. Again, because of this racist assumption that every Palestinian can be a potential terrorist, and therefore we don't know where the money is going to. And in the current catastrophe, really unimaginable, unspeakable catastrophe of mass starvation, where now over 23 Palestinian children have been literally starved to death. People find it really, really difficult to share or send money, transfer money to their families and loved ones inside of the Gaza Strip. Tools such as PayPal or other fundraising apps are also making it difficult to transfer those funds to Palestinians. Ironically, if you open your PayPal account, you will probably see the Ukrainian flag in the sign of a heart. And it's, for me, it's mind-boggling about, one, how these tools and platforms and companies are exacerbating the suffering and also the dehumanization of Palestinians. And again, how they decide which victims of military occupation are worthy of support and empathy, and which victims of military occupation and oppression that are, dehumanized, stigmatized, and seen as the aggressors, and therefore not worthy of support, and should be penalized and closely monitored. So that unfortunately is the reality of Palestinians, whether you're living in occupied Palestine or you're living abroad like myself. You always face the same wall. You hit the same wall of being denied access, being stigmatized, being monitored, surveilled, and censored. So I will stop here, noting of the time, and I'll hand it back to you, Mallory.